Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Three Pines. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, it seems like I got some of the pieces right. They just weren't in the right places with some of this mystery. But first and foremost, we're picking up in the aftermath of last episode where Thomas was going to kill himself. And he feels like he let his father down. And so it's a little bit of what I thought. Like, he was basically overcompensating. He did everything he could to be the favorite. But once again, Clara and even Irene referred to... no, it wasn't Irene. I keep forgetting. Wasn't it? No, I think it might have been Irene that referred to her, referred to Julia as the favorite. And for Thomas, it was like, right, I'm the oldest. I'm the one that took out and dealt with a lot of dad's BS. I was the one that was supposed to inherit everything. But it's like, right, it went to Julia, plus he's in debt. And it's kind of what I thought. Like, the hotel was supposed to be his lifeline throughout the circumstance. So... and the sad thing is, even his mom being like, oh yeah, I'm going to bring him some medicine. This is what usually calms him down in the past. Now you're going to admit that you killed your sister. It's like, I didn't do it, Mom. Like, the fact she was just kind of like, yeah, well, whenever he's man enough to admit what he did, it's like, right. And even our mom was like, right, you had to deal with your father's BS and then your mom being so hot and cold. Like, oh, she could be loving, yet so indifferent and mean in other capacities. And so it's like, it was just a toxic family to grow up in. No wonder they're all kind of all jacked up in their respective ways, because neither one of their parents are good people, their mom nor their dad. But Thomas ends up confessing what he was doing. Like, yes, he lied about his alibi because he was talking to his creditors in Singapore about everything. And his wife, she was under the impression like, oh, I thought you were having an affair. And she's like, I did everything to you thinking I thought you were with a younger woman. So she's like, I starved myself just to kind of look thinner and prettier for you. And it's like, wow. So that's what that was all about. And the sad thing is we found out what that stemmed from. It turns out Irene told her the moment they got married, that the moment Sandra and Thomas got married, like, hey, you better keep an eye on him because, infidelity runs in the family. And it's like, yeah, that's sad. Like, she put that, because that's why. I mean, I think you could easily make those justifications regardless. When Thomas was acting weird and suspicious the way he was, like, you couldn't help but kind of think something's up, but at least it adds more to it. Like, oh, she's had it implanted in her head the entirety of their marriage by his mother, by her own mother-in-law. Like, oh yeah, infidelity happens, like, because Charles cheated on her, so she's like, yeah, he's gonna do the same to you. Just keep an eye out on it. Like, almost like, oh, it's an inevitability, Which maybe there's some statistic to be like, yeah, if that happens, maybe there's some statistic down the road, but she shouldn't even said that. Once again, not the most supportive mother all across the board. And now it's like, she said all that, once again, last episode, she said all that foul shit about Julia, and now it's like, oh my God, Julia, oh, I'm gonna do it and honor Julia. Because what's also interesting too is, we didn't touch on it in this episode, she found her son, and we never got that resolved in this episode. She's like, oh yeah, I found my son, and I'm going to give him everything. So that ended up being a plot point, but we don't get a resolution to it. I mean, I wonder, did she ever tell her son about, like, cause I can't remember, she said she found him, but I don't know if they really interacted or not. So she might have actually found, like, what if her family adopted him and I don't know if they got to know each other. I don't think that ever came up in the specifics of last episode, but maybe it did. But it's like, yeah, that kid's never going to really know his biological mom because she's gone. I mean, her child was taken from her, when she was, a child herself. She was only 15 at the time, so. But obviously, like, a lot of this case starts hitting a lot of people. First, it's affecting Armand, because seeing Thomas potentially kill himself, it took him back to Missy. It made him go, like, he felt like he couldn't do anything to talk Missy off the ledge. Luckily, he was able to talk Thomas off the ledge, and things kind of ended okay. But it also seemed like Jean-Guy's got his own issues, like his marriage, when he sees what's going on with Sandra and Thomas, is like, yeah, they have their issues, but at the very least, at the end of the day, they still love each other. He even told Thomas, like, hey, like, at least the arguing is good, because arguing means at least they're talking to you. The moment the arguing stops, that just becomes a thing of like, right, we're just coexisting. We're not talking. So it seems like he was kind of taking that in conjunction with his conversation with Armand about marriage and stuff, because he's like, oh yeah, your marriage is perfect. And Armand's like, no, we have our issues, we have our differences. The fact is, he's like, with a job like ours, it's hard to kind of open up to people. He's like, but he opens up to his wife, but it's like, he's like, I sometimes feel like, yeah, she's there for me, but I feel like I'm dragging her down with all of that, the darkness of what we see. We see so much death and pain, and that's a lot to hold on to, and then it's even harder to kind of put that on some significant other. And John Gee was later on, he's like, oh, no, don't worry about what we talked about. I say a lot of crazy stuff when I'm drinking whiskey. I'm like, that seems interesting. That might be a plot thread we see kind of play out a little bit later on, but kind of seems like there's some issues in his marriage, and so like that kind of sparks something for him. I do love that Agent Nicole getting put on like outer perimeter patrol ended up being beneficial. It was just John Gee trying to get her out of the way, but it helped when they were trying to track down Elliot because he ran. Initially, I was like, wait, we're not going to find out Elliot's or something. I was like, there's no way, because she was like 15 when she had her kid. Her kid would be at most like early 20. Like, it's like, let's say Julia's like mid to early 30s. Her child would be a late teen, if not like early 20 at best, you know? So that's why I was like, it couldn't be him. Because that's why I was wondering, could it be like, that's what the laughing was all about when Sandra was like, yeah, I heard Julia laughing in her room and stuff. So I was curious. Well, because that also really quickly, that circles back to that why she had that hesitation when it's like, right, she was covering for Thomas, but she's like, I didn't lie, he did. And why she continued to have that look on her face, because she was like, is that bastard cheating on me? Or was it that, did he go off and kill his sister, which he didn't? Which that ends up being a whole set of issues in itself, because him and Sandra are able to kind of repair things. It's like, right, I should have leaned on you, I'm so sorry. And it seemed like, hey, they're going to work it out. But then, there's Peter being like, oh, look at this scene. He's like, look at me, bro. I'm innocent. It's like, cool. Our sister's still dead. He's like, yeah, but I didn't do it. He's like, oh, so that's all that it is. Once again, it was brought up last episode. It's like someone in their family got murdered, and none of them, like, with the exception of Peter and Mariana, they seem the only ones that really kind of cared. Thomas kind of didn't. Irene felt like she was pretending she did. I don't know if that was genuine or not, and whether she just had so many other things juggling that she just, but once again, I think Armand's perception of her being like the whole like hot and cold thing, I think it's really prevalent there. But it is that thing of like, yeah, he's more so concerned like, yeah, I'm sorry our sister was murdered, but hey, I'm scot-free for the murder because I didn't do it. It's like it's like, right, let's not forget our actual sister's still dead. But then he kind of throws it in Peter's face about the whole Julia thing. Like, right, you're the one that betrayed her. And despite everything, I was still loved by Dad no matter how much you did. So Peter stole his cufflinks and took off. And legitimately, these episodes could be movies within their own right. Like, this story in particular feels like it could be a movie. Like, if you remove the crime drama element to it, or even if you did keep the crime drama element, it could definitely be like movie or something all on its own. Like, because these are like basically hour and a half stories, because they're two-parters, so it pretty much is kind of a movie in its own right. But this one in particular, like, hey, this family's gathered because of this, and then tragedy strikes and one of their siblings died. Like, that could just be part of the movie, but also the fact, it makes me wonder, I don't know how many Armand Gamache novels there are. I know it's a series of novels with this character, but I don't know how. I'm about to say, not unless each one of these cases is its own book. Because, like, the Sherlock Holmes stories are like that, right? Like, every, like, movie adaptation or just adaptation or whatever typically is one of the, like, the one that I always jump out to is, like, The Hound of Baskerville. I think that's a book all in its own right. It's an entire book about the Hound of the Baskerville. I think, once again, I think I've read excerpts in English class from some Sherlock Holmes stuff, but never like a full-blown Sherlock Holmes story. That, you know what I mean? So I don't know. So that's why I was wondering about these. Like, could these individual episodes all be novels from the series, or are they all just pieces to the novels? I'm curious about that. It's something I have to look into it myself. Or if you know the answer, do let me know in the comments down below. But either way, like I said, they just feel like this could be a movie of just like, yeah, our sister died here and we're dealing with a lot of family issues because like them like duking it out or tackling each other and rolling around. Sandra there to help break it up, and so is Clara, and it's like, yeah, Thomas have their and him have their back and forth because Thomas is like, do you know what it's like to basically have to deal with Dad, always having to live with the fact that you'll never amount to what he wants, living in fear of being a disappointment. Peter's like, well, at least you had that opportunity to be a disappointment. I was never seen. He's like, what are you talking about? Dad always, you talking about Dad didn't buy any of your paintings. He always kept up with your career. And even Thomas admits later on, he's like, you had an escape. He's like, I thought you got away from all this. I figured you out of anyone would because you had your art. But sadly, Peter never did get away. He was still bound by him betraying Julia and the rift that it caused between them, which I'll circle back to that in a second. But like them all, including Sandra and Clara, ended up laughing after everyone kind of tumbled. And you know, it's like, because he's like, right, you got the wolf or the dog or whatever. I got a fucking lame duck or something like that, because he was considered the lame duck of the family, right? And then in that moment, they kind of bust out laughing, and I'm like, this would definitely be like, if you were to make this like, it'd be like a dramedy. Kind of a bit of a dark dramedy, I could definitely see in some capacities. But in that moment, it's just kind of like, they kind of laugh it out. It's just like, yeah, like, we've kept so much shit bottled up, and it's just like, man, Dad sucked major time. And then they're kind of like, you know, but it made their relationship stronger. They're good after it's all said and done, and I love that. But Peter, we finally understand why Peter did what he did when it came to Julia. And I think for him, maybe he's finally able to kind of figure it out himself, or maybe that was just, he never said why, and Clara was just making her own, you know, she might have made her own assumptions about why he did it, or maybe that's the reasoning he gave her. Maybe even he wasn't, but it definitely seemed like even he wasn't entirely sure. He believes it's because he wasn't trying to one-up her. He wanted to keep her around because for him, it's Julia was that one kind person in the family. Like, right, Thomas didn't make life easy. Thomas, in fact, was his bully. But it's also because it's like, and even Clara tried to say that. It's like, right, your father was, you know, it's typically how that happens. If you're being bullied by a bully, usually that bully is a byproduct of bullying. And if you were bullied, then the sad cycle of it repeats. So their father bullied him. He needed someone to kind of lash out against because he couldn't stand up to his father. So he had to stand, like, kind of squash on someone weaker to him, just like his father did. So, and Thomas regrets not, it's like, right, as the eldest, I should have had your back. And the fact is that Peter did what he did because he just wanted to keep Julia there because she was the only one. He didn't expect things to kind of, you know, it was just, he was a kid. He needed someone to have his back like Julia always did. And so he wanted to keep her around, and he didn't know it was going to cost him his relationship with his sister. And they can never, ever make things 100% right now that she's gone. So, but, I thought that was actually a really beautiful and touching moment, you know? And I think by the end of it, Irene is going to just kind of be alone. Once again, she didn't really help the situation much either, but this could be an opportunity, like the silver lining to this tragedy all around is maybe they can all come back together when this is all said and done. Because Irene is like, oh, well, honey, we'll go home and we'll find something for you. Because she was like saying some very horrendous stuff about how like, the fact is, Bean was kind of a drunken mistake. It's like, oh, and kind of throwing that in Mariana's face. You know, it's like, right, your father always knew, blah, 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 blah. Well, or was she referring to Mariana being the drunken mistake, as in, like, that's how their situation? I think she was referencing Bean. I think because the way our mom went to talk to her afterwards, she's like, yeah, I'm kind of fine with it. Like, you know, her mom made it kind of clear, like, the family and stuff like that. But Mariana was like, cool, Mom. Oh, don't worry about it. We're going to take 20 grand and we're going to get like a van and we're just going to go. That way you're going to have to find someone else to push around. And it's like, yeah, she's going to be alone because it's like, cool, you had at least Charles with you so long. And it's like, your kids are probably going to distance themselves from you after this. But once again, maybe the silver lining is maybe they can bridge some. It's like right out, especially after everything, it's like this would be the time to heal, but it might just be a thing of let's go live our lives. Kind of let's put the past behind us and just kind of go live our lives, which the past has played such an important role in this episode. So, really quickly, I brought up the Elliot thing. I was wondering where that was going to go. I was like, was there something there? It's like, no, he had sex with Julia, he left, but he was trying to run because he has charges against him. Because he's been arrested before and the cops are coming after him for... I mean, he was arrested before because of, I think he attacked his previous girlfriend or something like that. But now it's like, I don't know if there's other stuff he was implying like there's other stuff, the reason why the cops are after me, so I'm laying low here. So he wasn't the one responsible. Turns out he was on my suspect list. Maurice was. It's not what I initially... Well, it kind of plays into what I thought. I thought, like, right, his mom owned the place, and now it was going to go to Julia. Well, it runs a little deeper than that because he's a bastard child in the Morrow family. His mom, because they brought it up this episode about him having affairs, and what was Irene saying? Like, oh, he wouldn't be so careless, so there wouldn't be any babies running around. Because what brought this up is that when it came to the will constantly kept changing over and over again. As Mariana put it, it's like it was our dad's sick way of being like, hey, you know, you never know, like, no one's ever going to fully know what they got until the last minute. There was originally supposed to be 5 people, not including Irene. Irene was already going to get what she was going to get, but the rest of the inheritance was going to get split between 5 people. There's the 4 children. It's like, well, was it the grandchildren? And it's like, no. Turns out it was Maurice, the illegitimate child. He's actually the oldest, so all Thomas's grievances kind of are exemplified even more in Maurice, because it's like, right, your father was kind of shitty to you, but at least he acknowledged you and was shitty to you. Peter was ignored, but you were still part of the family. You were able to keep the name. Me, I was Dad's biggest, dirtiest, darkest secret. And the fact is that he was initially going to include him in the will, but then took him out just because it's like, I guess he didn't want to admit sharing his fortune or whatever, his legacy, with a child that he didn't recognize, or also he didn't want the rest of his family to find out. So that's why he removed it from the will at the last second. So you're like, you couldn't do right by your illegitimate child one last day. And if you had, I mean, who knows if this could have all been avoided. It's like, right, he wasn't the greatest father. Let's just put it at that. Like, the trauma he caused this family, it isn't like, oh, like, this would have rectified it. Like, but they could have all worked towards figuring stuff out, maybe. But Maurice, once again, he was there. Because at the beginning, I was like, right, okay, so I was like, okay, Thomas isn't the stag, so I thought it was going to be Julia. She was the stag. Once again, she was the favorite. Well, it turns out it wasn't her, because none of them could remember who shot, but I thought they were like, oh, like, it had to be Julia. But even Peter was like, I think it must have been Julia. It's like, he's saying it like he didn't know for sure. So I was like, why is that? Well, because there was someone else there, and even Peter himself said, it's like, yeah, sometimes, Maurice would always be there, and we never noticed. And that's why. He probably even more so than Peter was kind of the invisible son. I mean, probably even worse, because it was like, I see you and I choose to ignore you type of situation. Because the way Thomas talks about it, Peter wasn't completely ignored, because, right, you are his rightful children. Because I don't know if this was an affair that happened before, like, this is an affair that happened before his other children were born, but he was still with Irene, or was it a relationship that predated him marrying Irene? So either way, he never did right by Maurice and his mom. And he waits. He was the loyal son. He stayed quiet. He did what he was supposed to. Once again, like, he's everything that Thomas was, just exemplified even more so. And it's like, right, at the end, he gave it all to Julia, which Maurice didn't mind. He cared about Julia. She was so nice to him. And he confessed to her, and Julia laughed. Because, for one, Julia was drunk. She was angry. She wanted to cut ties with everything related to this family. Like, deuces to everything. Because regardless of it all, you shared her father's DNA. And it's like, right, my other siblings suck, so you're most likely going to suck too. So I want nothing to do with you. And she just kept laughing and laughing. And it's like, maybe if she was sober, maybe if it was under different and better circumstances, things could, because once again, she was drunk as hell. Like, she had been drinking a lot. That was her way to kind of drown out a lot of her pain. And Maurice just acted the way he did and ended up killing her. It's such a shame. And I guess, like, there is that thing of being, like, even when it was all said and done, because she was held hostage by him, but when it was all said and done, he was taken away in a police car. They kind of, like, nod to each other, because it's like, I think she actually felt bad for him. It's like, right, you're a sad byproduct of this family. It's like, you didn't ask for this. It's just, you shouldn't have done what you did. And because obviously even Bean was like, yeah, I didn't know Aunt Julia that well. She even had that moment with Armand earlier, where she was like, yeah, I don't know my dad. My mom, doesn't need a man. She tells herself that every day in the mirror, but she's like, I like to pretend my dad's different things. Like, well, what is your dad today? It's like, he's a lot like you, putting away the bad guys, so. So like I said, I don't know if this, once again, any silver lining of, hey, maybe this kind of could work towards this family coming together now that everything's kind of out and open, or maybe they will just simply drift, and sadly the next time they get together will most likely when their mom passes, but hopefully they stay in touch with each other, the siblings, like, let's kind of, let's not continue, even now that dad's gone, let's not let him continue to divide us. I don't know. I think it also speaks volumes in this episode too. Peter makes all those remarks about him being the invisible one. It's like, if you do notice, like with the whole Mariana thing, like most of the time the siblings are the ones kind of away from Mariana. Their mom is the only one that's typically with her in a lot of scenes. So I think it almost kind of fits that thing of like, right, I was kind of like even more so the invisible one. Even though Peter wanted to say he was the invisible one, it's like, no, I was the real invisible one amongst the family. So not like I expected this to have some like, yeah, everything's great. It's like, yeah, these are always going to have like sad like developments going on, There's never going to be like like all's well in the world. It's like, no, this family situation was kind of shit to begin with. For years it's been shit, and it's just kind of like, yeah, like I said, maybe there's a silver lining to it with what remains of the family. I don't know. Maybe in the long run, this could help Peter towards healing after everything's said and done. It doesn't completely fix the past, because they can't change the past. All they can do is try and correct things moving forward. Is the best that they can do. So we'll see how things kind of play out for Peter, especially like when it comes to his art going forward. Will it kind of continue to kind of reflect any stuff between him and Julia after everything that's happened? We'll have to wait and see. But another big part of this episode is picking up with the element from last episode where Kevin wanted to meet with Isabel, and obviously he rolls up on her with a gun. I guess it's understandable. It's like, once again, I don't know who told, like, we never got an answer to that, because he specifically said, they told me I could trust you. I guess like she reached out to someone who ended up reaching, like, I don't know how that happened. I must be missing something. I don't remember like how they would have gotten in contact with Kevin and why he would say like, oh, they say I can trust you. Like maybe he asked around, like who did you talk to ask about that? Like how would you know that's, I don't know. But he rolls up on her because he's distrustful. It's like, right, did you actually come alone? Can I really trust you? And it turns out it confirms what I thought last episode, because I brought it up earlier on in the season. Like it seemed a little too suspicious and convenient. Like, hey, like Blue's family was looking for her for so long, and like, they probably did their own things, but they were trying to get the cops to actually look and investigate. But it's like, so they didn't find this stuff, but all of a sudden, all this stuff, like after like a year of just looking into things a little bit, you just happen to stumble across some of this stuff about Blue. It felt too convenient. In earlier points, I was like, yeah, because it's evidence only like a cop would find, which I guess wouldn't be too suspicious, but it rubbed me the wrong way. And then especially after him being like, oh, I don't want to see you and your boss. I just want you to come. No other cops, because he didn't trust cops, because they got pulled over and he ran away because he has priors, and he heard 3 gunshots. So it's like, right. So I guess somebody got double tapped, maybe. Like maybe something went down, there was a struggle, and the gun went off and shot one of them, and they had to kill the other one to try and like cover up their mess, and one of them was still alive, so they had to do the double tap maybe. Well, add another shot to the second shot. I don't know, because there was a little space in between. It's like first shot, then it was like second shot, third shot. There was like I think it was more space between the second and the third shot, but I could be misremembering. But Kevin doesn't want to like go anywhere with her, because she's like, right, we can help you. I can just go with but it's like, he's like, I want to meet your boss. Like, how do I know you're not lying to me? It's like, it's understandable you don't know who to trust, because there is sadly, I think obviously this is in Canada, but I'm sure like the Blue Veil situation still exists. Obviously that's a big thing here in the US. I'm actually curious, like how big of an issue is that in a lot of other countries? Because I don't, and I could be ignorant on the subject, but I feel like the police brutality element of police kind of power tripping, doing their own thing. And once again, this does not include all cops. Even the blue veil does not apply to all cops. Not all cops are like, are like that. I'm not trying to speak in generalities, but there is a, percentage. I'm not going to give a number because I don't know statistically or whatever it is, but there is a percentage of cops who fall in that veil of kind of the police brutality lane of things, but also the blue veil type of thing of like, we got to look out for each other type of thing. Whether that's just out of your own need for self-preservation, because it's like, who knows how many cops were involved in that. It could be like this one cop power trip did some terrible stuff, but it's like, I gotta fall in line. Maybe I was there but I didn't do anything, but that's the problem. I didn't do anything, so I'm just as culpable. So if they go down, I'm gonna go down with them, and even if I rat on them, all the other cops are gonna turn on me for being a rat. So that circumstance could be applicable in this Blue and Tommy situation, and Kevin's situation as well. So, but my point what I was about to make is like, I don't know how big of an issue that is internationally outside of the U.S. Like I'd say I brought it up with Canada, but you never really hear about the police brutality issue as much, or just like the issues that the U.S. has when it comes to cops. Sometimes I don't know if we see that anywhere else in the out there in the world, but it probably happens, but maybe not to the scale it does here in the U.S. Maybe that's kind of. That's a whole conversation in itself. Like I said, it was a bit of a tangent, but it made me wonder since I was on the topic. But Kevin just kind of ups and disappears until he later on calls Isabel and is like, right, can you keep me safe? It's like, right, me and my boss will find you. Sadly, Kevin kept waiting, and he was actually going to leave because he's like, right, he started getting nervous. It's like, right, he probably thought, like, what if Isabel and them betrayed me? So he was going to leave and go to New York, but they were so caught up with the Morrow case that by the time they got to the Vietnamese restaurant he was waiting at, he was already gone. And then all of a sudden, he ends up getting arrested at the airport, which, to be fair, his face is plastered all over the news. They're saying he did this terrible thing. Armand did looking at the blood samples from Kevin and Tommy's place. It turns out that that couldn't have been from like a gunshot wound or anything. Like, it wasn't like they were killed there. It was planted evidence. And once again, it's like only a cop will be able to have access to be able to go this hard in the paint with like framing a frame job on Kevin. But my thing was like, how did they know where he was? Like I said, his face is plastered everywhere. Someone could have called him in, but the timing was just so interesting that the moment he's trying to leave to New York, this happens. He gets arrested. I could already tell by the time Isabel and Armand were going to get there, I was like, he's going to be dead, isn't he? And they find him in his cell dead. I was expecting a hanging situation to make it look even more like a suicide. This will probably be like he had drugs in his system, or maybe he snuck drugs in and overdosed because he couldn't live with what he did. I can see that narrative being spun. But Armand and Isabel know now, it's like, right, we don't know who to trust. I wouldn't trust the guy that Armand's been going to, the one that's like, hey, do it for your sake, you're not on this case, don't, he told him last episode, kind of back off of this case because, and I'm like, well, you're number one on my list. There's also the possibility of their captain, the one who sent him to 3 Pines in the first place. That guy might be responsible too, because he's the one that's tried to tell Armand to back off the most. But it could just be like he has his reasons for it, but it could just be like he's covering up for the actual killer. So there might be, like I said, that blue veil of just, I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see where everything ends up taking us going forward in the next episode with that. It's interesting too, just kind of tying things off at the end. The whole aspect about Armand and his dreams, him talking to his wife about how his dreams are turning against him. Obviously, he's dreaming about Missy, suicide, and then he's dreaming about being turned to stone. And it's just like, I guess, like in some of his cases, and in some of the regards, his dreams have kind of been a guide. Now they're more so turning against him, and he's played with nightmares. And I think about mistakes and things he wishes he had done differently and how they're manifesting themselves. Because that dream, after waking up from Missy, like he heard the blue jay at the window, and then he started turning to stone. So that was interesting. But also, it's like, right, there was him sitting in bed, and then he looked up, and there was him at the doorway turning to stone, turning back, and it's him laying in bed completely turned to stone. So what that means necessarily, once again, a lot of this we'll have to wait to see where everything takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.